Hey, so first video in this new channel here. I'm going to be using this channel to post videos about how I make art using AI and potentially some other tools that I'm working on surrounding recreating this style without using AI. So those will be some drawing tools for both drawing these scenes manually, but also procedurally generating scenes that feel like these. So that's coming soon. But yeah, so I've been creating art like this for a few months now, and a lot of people seem to be interested in it on Instagram, which is very exciting. A lot of people are curious about how to actually recreate this style. Part of it, here is the scenery that I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is these almost imaginary but realistic worlds that feel old and kind of futuristic at the same time. Someday I would like to actually build a place, take a property and convert it to something that felt like some of this. So this is all very close to home in terms of what I'm interested in, and I think a lot of other people kind of connect with this feeling of both more kind of an organic, more traditional feeling of art, as well as a more organic and kind of relaxed form of architecture in spaces. Whereas the kind of popular direction that we're headed in right now is more cyberpunky, brutalist. There's some natural interest in natural things, but the direction we're going in hasn't been in this direction for a while, and and I think a lot of other people would like us to go more in this direction. So that's that. I do AI art here. I also do traditional art over on this account. This has been on pause for a while, and it's kind of picking back up. But yeah, let's get into it. So here I've got Midjourney up, which if you don't have an account, you can just go to the website. And there's a sign up button. There's a free tier, so you can use it without paying. But I use the paid tier because you get faster results, and um, it's just a lot better setup for somebody doing this more frequently. So I would start out free and then consider the paid option if you like it. One thing I should say before getting into this is that a lot of people dislike Midjourney because they scraped art off of the internet. They didn't ask each individual artist for permission. So there's a lot of art in here in this model, which is not a library of art so much as a kind of abstraction of all of the art it has seen. A lot of that art it has seen has been without consent. So, it's up to you whether you feel like what you're doing is creative enough and different enough from other artists that have put the work into their art that you're not stealing. So yeah, so what I've got on the screen here is two just initial examples of what you get out of Midjourney by default. This is helpful to know because Midjourney has a bit of a bias. Certain types of images were fed into Midjourney. That helps create good results if your images are in that style, but sometimes you have to kind of fight against this style. So knowing what just kind of comes out by default is really helpful so you can counteract that where you need to. So here I've got an example of art. I've got a lot of portraits. It's a bit more vibrant than maybe what you would see in a museum, a bit more kind of dramatic or like something you might see more on Pinterest. So, the default weight of art is more in the direction of maybe Pinterest than refined, something you would see on a wall. Um, Also showing here what watercolor gets you. Obviously, watercolor to Midjourney means color. It means this kind of feeling of water as well as the medium itself. So Midjourney doesn't do a good job of really understanding that this is just a different medium, a specific subset of art. It kind of thinks it's its own thing, and it's also kind of reading this wording as both the overall meaning and as the composite parts. So the words, while they're simple, kind of do all the work here. Um, I would think of this like searching Google. So even though this stuff doesn't actually exist yet, this specific arrangement of pixels has never existed. And I could just hit rerun and rerun. I'd get infinite new art. So yeah, thinking like searching allows us to think more like how we describe things when we're talking to Google, which is another machine that involves AI, right? So we're trying to get this thing to just show us results like we want. To do that, we have to figure out what words point at the right things. So I'm going to start getting into building a prompt that feels like my art. So in a lot of my artwork, I have an archway. We're outdoors. We've got a person usually doing something, either walking, standing, thinking. Often we've got this kind of warmer light. Here it's cooler, but in many of these, we've got a sunset feeling, a later in the day area of light on the trees. The style is more minimalist than maybe what you would see coming out of Midjourney by default. It's more orderly, symmetrical. So I'm going to use a lot of keywords like those. So I am going to use watercolor here, but I'm going to go watercolor print because I think that tends to feel like something that has actually made it onto paper more often. Watercolor as well as woodblock, which is a different type of print that is more traditional and it has a little bit less of this blotchy thing going on. And then I'm also going to throw in some keywords like minimalist, subdued, to kill off some of this flashiness, refined, also for the same purpose. Minimalist, maybe simple, clean, to kill off some of this kind of dramatization here. So we're going to take this and run it, which will take, a few seconds. It kind of progressively builds the image. So we'll actually see it come in a second here as an early stage rendering. All right, so as you can tell, this already starts to feel closer to what I'm doing over here. It's much more black and white. It's much more kind of Japanese or, yeah, it's got some of these Japanese shapes like these trees. That would be most likely because Midjourney by default is already weighted toward Japanese art a bit. But woodblock prints are something that mainly Japanese artists did and published. So as soon as you get into woodblock, you already kind of have a bias there. If you're not going for a Japanese style, you have to kind of counteract that with something, either a location that is not Japan or a kind of cultural, sometimes I use the keyword Persian because I like Persian architecture. So I'll use Persian as well as a location like maybe Utah or this canyon I like in Colorado, El Dorado Canyon. So we'll do both of those here and kind of see how they affect this prompt. Persian, and I'm going to get rounded archway in there, person walking. So this will get us more in the United States in a national park. You can say that. You can say United States. Rounded archway will get us some kind of stone archway. I like sandstone as a material, so I frequently go sandstone. All right, so these are starting to feel a little bit more like what I've got going on. They're still a little more washy. They've got more kind of sketchiness, artifacts of physical printing. I like a style that feels almost like a comic illustration, like a flat drawing that is done in a book, but has the colors and softness of woodblock and watercolor art. So a couple things I'm going to do here. I'm going to try to get rid of some of that noise, that sketchiness. And then I'm also going to try to fix a bit of the color, which is a bit orange for me right now, as well as, this one's really cool actually. The lighting is why it's cool. The way that this texture was done, as well as the kind of high exposure, the good contrast level basically, where there's high exposure, but you can still read it really well and it doesn't feel overblown. The framing of the figure in the archway is like centered and symmetrical, but still pretty organic. This looks too much like a photo. The colors aren't very interesting. Too green, too rough. Nothing really very enticing about it except for the framing. The framing is good. Same thing here. Just good framing, but that's it. I mean, they're both minimal. Like if somebody actually did this by hand, this would be incredible hand art. Just relatively between this and the other two, it's clearly the strongest. As you find, this is a process I'll go through verbally in a couple different ways, but there's a wide spectrum of what good art is. This is good art. This is better art, in my opinion. I think that's almost a fact. There are certain people who might prefer this for certain reasons, like they like cooler, darker colors, or they might like that kind of wash. I think if you just blur your eyes, this is what stands out, and that's what stands out to most people. So I'm going to operate off of that. That's not a fact. It's my opinion, but I think there's some groundedness in it based on the wide range I've seen. Let me know if you want to talk more about that. I'm curious what other, especially artists, think about whether or not there's some kind of objective way of measuring art, because my feeling is that while these are good in some ways, in terms of what, if you were asking somebody what is the best art here, I would go number one, number two. I would put everything else in the same category beyond that of like kind of a wash. Like it's good technically, it's required somebody skilled to complete it, but that's most of what's valuable about these. Whereas these kind of have really a feeling to them. They feel, this guy and this guy really feel like they are priceless in a little bit of a way. Okay, enough talking. So I'm going to use this no flag. That is like a reverse search. So I want less of this kind of sketchiness, muddiness, dark, cool. What I want is warm things. I want warm, clear. I've already said some of that, so it's kind of tricky here. I can go clear and intricate. Often those work well. I'm also going to push the color. I'm partly going to push the color by putting specific things in the scene. So I'm not going to say more green necessarily, but I'm going to put grass and maybe a giant redwood tree. I think that part of how I've been able to get this expansive kind of wide angle shot is you can try typing in wide angle, but it doesn't really do anything. A lot of these kind of intentional ways of talking to Midjourney don't really work. So you have to use tricks. One trick I've found is that both archways and huge elements like trees or buildings allow you to bring the character or figure down in scale. So, you know, the things that Midjourney thinks are in the scene are all have to be relatively placed somewhere. And if you've got more big things, a person is a certain size relative to big objects. So, all right, does this look familiar now? So if we go back here, pretty close to where I started. So I'm going to stop engineering the prompt here. We could do anything we want with this. We could be more specific about how the archway looks. We could say constructed out of stone blocks. We could say I want a river or a pink sunset or a, you know, small village with people walking around. All of those things are just things to try, and then you'll find good results. You can hone in on them, and then you can describe fixes for what's wrong with them. So that's kind of the prompt engineering portion here. Next, we'll go into upscaling, and this I think is probably the subtlest part in terms of like skill of eye. Having a good eye is really helpful for this part. So, you know, up till here, we kind of just blur our eyes, and it's like no problem to figure out which ones will work as interesting pieces. You know, this one interests me, it interests other people, it's going to work. This one I think is now kind of the second, you know, runner up. I think this is cooler still than any of these. Either this guy or this guy is next most interesting. This is cool because the arch, the color's a little yellow. That can be fixed if you're good with Photoshop, but for most people, focusing on just getting a good starting result will be a lot easier than trying to fix something going in the wrong direction. Here we've got a pretty good scene, but it's a little bit, it just doesn't have a lot of personality. The person's a little bit hard to see. It's a little blue. The detail isn't very interesting. You know, the like brushwork. That brushwork is pretty mediocre. Obviously, it's, again, extremely talented if you can actually do this by hand, but relative to what I've seen in Midjourney, it's relatively okay. Whereas this tree is pretty prime. You know, that's what I'm going for, is these shapes that feel elegant and balanced. Like there's some amount of pattern, but they're not like rigidly on a grid or anything like that. I call this organic minimalism, a kind of a pattern that is still natural, but has this kind of simplicity of the number of things going on. There's only so many shapes and colors you're seeing here. In some of these other images, they just don't have that feeling of grid-like almost by nature, but still organic. They're more washed out. There's not as much structure or repetition. The grass is a little bit like this, but it's low definition. It's kind of, this tree has much more information if you look closely, whereas this grass, it's like you look at it at a glance and you've seen all you need to see. Okay, so I'm going to upscale this guy, and this guy. And what upscaling is basically taking this and within a certain range of variety, changing details to make them more precise. So it's kind of like, take this little area of pixels. It's got to have roughly the same structure, but Midjourney is going to kind of try to make some of the details a bit sharper. Sometimes this works well. Sometimes it does not. This looks like it'll get more detail well, but it might come out weird colors, or it might come out with the wrong kind of brush stroke. Sometimes things just come out right, but it is an attribute that's specifically associated with each image. So like, I can upscale this a few times. It will add intricacy to the image, and it will do that in a fairly consistent way for each image. So this guy we're going to see is going to come out upscaled looking a certain way, and all subsequent upscales will kind of have a similar quality to that. Okay, so here we're looking at this thing, and I'm not really seeing any better detail. I feel like this actually lost some of what it had that was important about it too. So this is not very usable. I'm going to rerun this a couple times because I liked the original image, but there's a good chance, unfortunately, that this image is just not usable because Midjourney doesn't really know how to create that extra level of detail for it. That came out fairly well. It's not something I would post yet. This is too washed out. This is too washed out, but this is pretty good. The guy looks a bit like a modern boy running to school. Sometimes I throw in 1920s or archival. That will kick it back in history a century or so, which is nice in some cases. This is a pretty good upscale. There's more detail on the tree. Nothing is too weird except for down here. These branches are something I would try to remove in Photoshop at least. I wouldn't use this image. It's too generic, too flat for me, not colorful enough for me. Those are the things I think about, but of course, this is, again, beautiful art that I still would love to have on my wall. It's just not my preference if I'm choosing. So, all right, here is why I liked this image. If you can see this tree, it looks so good. It's like, if I could just crop this tree out and use it in every or most images where there was a tree, I would. This leaves something to be desired. But yeah, I'll leave that one there. This is, I think, again, objectively not as interesting of a piece of art as this guy, right? That's all right. That's pretty good, pretty crisp, pretty good colors, not washed out. The tree's all right, but this one is still stronger, I think, in terms of the tree at least. This last one might be the best overall because the other details in this scene are good enough for the tree, basically. People will be uninterested in this stuff if there is any weak aspect. So the only kind of stuff that I find people are really interested in, is when every detail, the color, the lighting, every object in the scene, the framing, this guy is a little bit wonky, kind of just looks a little bit like childish or something. It would be way stronger if that was like an elegant person in a robe walking confidently on some mission, they're going somewhere fast, it's urgent. Or if it was a couple walking peacefully in the evening, there are a lot of other things that could be there, and getting all of those details right is tricky. So this guy, stronger, still washed out, but I'm probably not going to get any better than that. If I really like this image, which I don't think I do quite enough, I would keep trying. But you're paying, basically, when you pay for Midjourney, you're paying in minutes. So you can't just kind of waste the time you're using. You have minutes that you pay for. You get a certain amount each month for free, but then beyond that, you have to pay for the extra you use minute by minute. So that's upscaling. Here was another generation where I added 1920s archival, and you can see it kind of feels less modern in some ways. The figures are less likely to be modern. This is still pretty modern, so you could throw another 1920s in there. There are other things you can do to age it, but that's the idea. So after this is basically the end of my process in Midjourney. I'm not going to, in this video, do a process on Photoshop or other tools, but I will note that I do, after this, typically crop. So I'll crop this guy to not have the paper. I'll kill any artifacts like this with generative fill. Down here, there's kind of a line. I'll clean it up, basically, and then I'll fix the colors. So like this is a bit orange and a bit blue at the same time. I might try to do something about that. The colors are the hardest part for me. I think they're the hardest part for a lot of people. Often, even though you know that this doesn't look quite right, it's really unclear what to actually do to fix it. So again, I suggest working to find good images rather than picking challenging images and then doing a bunch of work on them. Spend your time coming up with ideas rather than clicking buttons in Photoshop. And then after that, I will sometimes upscale it again. So I'll take it from this resolution, which is like 3K roughly, to 4 or 8. I'll do that if that works well. Sometimes it ruins the feeling, and in that case, I won't. And then I will upload it to this tool called Immersity. Immersity takes an image, a 2D image, and analyzes it for depth, and then lets you animate in and out. So we can go look at my page here if we find one that uses it. So as you zoom in here, you see the walls are moving more quickly than the background. This isn't just a zoom effect in Premiere scaling up. It's like creating a camera that understands the distances objects are in the scene, and it skews them proportionally. So I know that's a lot of information. I spoke quickly because I wanted to keep it dense so that, people who can keep up are interested. But if you found it too quick, please go back and you can listen to it on half speed even. And I am totally happy to answer questions in the comments here or in DMs on Instagram. I'm going to post this on both YouTube and Instagram, and I'm going to do more of these. Let me know, what types of videos you're interested in seeing, either prompt related or editing, or how I come up with ideas, that kind of thing. So let me know. Thanks for watching.